But first, our top stories. Papers released by the government say there will be higher credit card charges, long customs delays and more red tape if there is a no-deal Brexit. Donald Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has told Sky News that the American people would revolt if the president was impeached. The British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who was imprisoned in Iran on spying charges, has been released for 3 days. Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with The Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Sodha and the deputy editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. So let's see what's on some of those front pages now. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, is under fire for suggesting a no-deal Brexit would have large fiscal consequences for the UK, and in doing so, undermining Theresa May. That's according to The Telegraph. Similar sentiments in The Times, which reports that Mr Hammond is attacking the optimism of some of his colleagues. While The Express asks, what does Mr Hammond think he's playing at? The Metro also leads on the uncertainty over Brexit with their headline, "It's a big deal if it's no deal." And it's the same story in The Eye, which warns of a cabinet rift. The Guardian leads with a study from the United States, which has found bots and Russian trolls have been spreading misinformation about vaccines online. The paper also features a smiling photo of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who has been released from an Iranian jail for 3 days. The Financial Times reports that Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, Riyadh, is primed to ask international banks to lend it $11 billion as state energy listing Saudi Aramco stalls. While the Star has word that Dec Donnelly will have a different co-presenter for the next series of I'm a Celebrity. We don't yet know who that person is, but they will temporarily replace Ant McPartlin. And we're joined tonight by Sonia Sodha and Tom Slater. Good evening to you both. So, Brexit across many of the front pages, and we're going to start with The Eye, and it's writing about the new cabinet rift, and this is between Philip Hammond on the one hand, writing a letter today, and Dominic Raab trying to reassure people.
That's right. So there's really two big political Brexit stories, which I think shows what a mess the government is in. So on the one hand, this was supposed to be Dominic Raab, the Brexit Secretary's big day. He was launching the first in a series of 80 technical notices that are supposed to set out exactly what might happen in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And his line was very much, even though if you look at the detail of these papers, they're incredibly worrying, all the extra charges British consumers might face, the extra costs that are going to be loaded onto British businesses if we were to leave the EU without a deal. But his line was very much, nothing to see here. Most consumers won't even notice it. It was supposed to be his moment, but what you've also had is Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, publishing a letter that he's written to MPs about the cost of a no-deal Brexit. Now, these messages could not be further apart. Philip Hammond says it would cost the British economy up to 80 billion a year in extra borrowing by 2023, just as the Brexit Secretary was going out and telling people, don't worry, you'll barely notice us leaving.
So, and any issues will be short-term.
Absolutely. So it's a really big rift. It shows the mess that Theresa May's government is in. I'm personally much more with Philip Hammond. I think if you read the detail of these technical notices, you can't look at them and see, not think that they're going to be huge costs for the economy. You can't just fantasize them all away, which I think is what Dominic Raab is trying to do. But beyond the substance, it really just does show that how divided the cabinet continue to be.
Tom?
No, I think the first point is it's obviously clear that the Tory party is still very much split on Brexit. They're incapable of speaking with one voice, and even as supposedly they're getting down to the nitty-gritty with the Chequers deal, they're still negotiating with themselves. I think that's really clear. The only thing I will say about these technical notices is the fact that in terms of the announcements that were made today by Dominic Raab, I think a lot of people are making a hell of a lot out of not very much. I mean, you could say that
if you were an organic farmer, though, and you were told you'd have to wait 9 months for certification, you'd be saying that was a pretty big deal, wouldn't you?
No, definitely, but there's first of all, there's been a lot of already reassurances in relation to the questions of subsidies for various agricultural producers, etc. I mean, one of the main stories that you've seen leading everywhere today is this question of surcharges, insofar as this ban on any charges when you're buying things using your card, perhaps from EU companies. That ban came in January, so the idea that we can't possibly live without it, I find it slightly strange. But nevertheless, I think in a way,
tourists abroad on the continent, if we started to see charges go up quite significantly when you use your credit card abroad, which is another thing that's being talked about, I don't think people are going to be very happy with that. Roaming charges is another thing that people have really embraced. You don't have to pay roaming charges anymore in the EU. I think actually you're right that some of these things aren't going to make that much difference in monetary terms. I mean, they will make a bit of difference in people's pockets, but I think it is actually the stuff that people are going to really care about. If you start getting charged £5 a minute to make a call to another EU country on your mobile, people aren't going to feel that happy about that.
I just dare say when people voted to leave the European Union, they thought some things were more important than roaming charges. But nevertheless, I think it just shows the fact that there's enough to dig into.
I think roaming charges are really important to me. So
let's have a look at the Telegraph, and it's is also talking about Philip Hammond, and this letter that he's written hasn't gone down well in Downing Street.
No, it hasn't whatsoever. Now, if anything, Downing Street are seemingly trying to kind of play down this letter, saying that they don't comment when MPs are just sending letters to other MPs. But there's it's quite clear that, particularly amongst the Tory backbenchers, this has gone down not particularly well. There's a quote here from Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Eurosceptic backbencher, saying, "As a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly." And I think that really shows how, in the kind of Tory battle over the European Union, Philip Hammond has really become the kind of figurehead for this. I think the only thing that I would say in relation to this is we've seen this kind of scaremongering from the Treasury before. It was from George Osborne's Treasury that we heard that every household in Britain in 2016 would be £4,300 worse off each year, and it's just striking that a lot of people on the kind of liberal left of politics seem to be taking what a Tory Treasury is saying completely seriously.
Is that not the Treasury's job?
Absolutely. It's the Treasury's job to make these forecasts. They're not always 100% accurate. I personally do think that that Osborne was wrong to say with such certainty that the economy was going to be hit incredibly hard the minute the public voted to leave. I don't think that was ever really going to be do case.
But the timing from Philip Hammond on the day that Dominic Raab was
it's completely deliberate.
Which has been known about for a long time.
There's no question that this is Hammond, the Chancellor, trying to undermine the Brexit Secretary, two of the most senior politicians in the cabinet. So politically, it looks absolutely dreadful, but it absolutely is the Treasury's job. And I think, the problem for Raab is that he's saying one thing, he's giving one message, but as soon as you get into the detail of these technical notices, you start to find they're not so technical after all. They're really sort of talking about very big changes that will really impact on British businesses. And, that's how you get to this 80 billion figure. If you've got things like, as you said, organic farmers suddenly finding that they have to wait 9 months to be able to sell their products as organic across the rest of the EU. All that stuff really, really adds up.
The message, though, from Dominic Raab today seemed to be that the government was going to take a pragmatic approach and was going to do as much as it could to maintain current scenarios. But that relies on the EU also taking a pragmatic approach as well, doesn't it? And the suggestion that no deal would actually mean a series of little deals.
No, completely. And I think that's one thing which, there's kind of two types of no deal which people talk about. There's a no deal where everything's just cut and run, which I think is probably quite unlikely. But then there's a no deal as in there's no future relationship. In terms of the things that we need to keep things moving, those things will be sewn up.
In terms of medicines, for example.
Exactly. And I think one thing that Dominic Raab did, which was quite important today actually, was to underline the fact that a lot of the more substantial issues that we could face would be on behalf of EU intransigence. Like if we're talking about, for instance, the question of medicines, which has been naturally a concern of a lot of people, that's something which the British government could unilaterally, the day after a no-deal Brexit, say we are not going to put any more conditions on these can come through. It's only really the other way.
Because that's a focus of this Metro article, that the 6 weeks of medical supplies being stockpiled.
So, and that's something that the Health Secretary today was trying to strike a balance. He was saying that, first of all, he was saying to doctors' surgeries, to hospitals, as well as to individual patients, that they shouldn't be stockpiling this stuff. But there has been a message sent out, obviously, to the producers of this stuff. But nevertheless, that's one of those things where, in a lot of this scaremongering, that's something which unilaterally would be within the British government's gift to make sure that medicine kept flowing. I think the fact it keeps being brought up just shows that there's an attempt to play up the risks of some of these things.
No, I don't think that's true at all. I think the reason why doctors are bringing this up, I think because they're politically motivated. hospitals because they're genuinely worried that the patients might not be able to get access to the medicines they need. And if you look at the drugs industry, the way it works, like much of the British economy actually, is on a just-in-time basis. So things are produced and they are shipped literally, you know, a day or two before they're needed. That's the way that the whole industry works. It's the way that the food industry works, for example, which is why as soon as you get the government starting to talk about stockpiling, I think it betrays a real kind of misunderstanding about how the economy works and the modern economy works.
But it makes sense, does it not, to put these plans in place, these contingency plans, in case of a no deal, that we have 6 weeks' worth of medicines that are held by the pharmaceutical companies so that hospitals don't run out?
No, I think it's also, in a way, Dominic Raab is in an impossible position, because if he came out today and said everything would be totally fine, and here was just, we'll worry about the detail later, people would say he had his head in the sand. But if he came out too hard and saying, all of these things are on the table and they could possibly happen and we're prepared for them, he'd be accused of fear-mongering. So I think he's in a difficult position in relation to
and
this
as
stuff.
you said, Sonia, this is the first of many. We've had 24 out of 84
that's right.
technical notices, so lots more to
And I
come.
think it's notable as well that the ones that the government have put out first, the most straightforward ones, actually the most difficult, thorny subjects, particularly Northern Ireland, are yet to come.
Yes, and we did have mention of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and anyone who needs to get goods across the land border there, speak to Ireland, was the message, wasn't it? Let's just have a look inside the Express, and Jeremy Corbyn making a speech today in Edinburgh, but he is, according to the Express, embroiled in a new row over anti-Semitism. What's this about?
So this is another video, basically, that's kind of surfaced. I think it's fair to say that this is probably the most explicit example so far that people are pointing to about Jeremy Corbyn himself being potentially anti-Semitic, rather than just being, shall we say, a bit too relaxed about it with people around him. So at a conference in London in 2013, he's led to have started to kind of wax lyrical about Zionists and saying that they have two problems. One is they don't want to study history, and secondly, having lived in this country, Britain, for a very long time, probably all their lives, don't understand English irony. And the clear implication there is the Zionist equals Nazis thing, which is a deeply loaded anti-Semitic trope. And I think we're getting much closer here to a point in which we're not just questioning whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is too relaxed about anti-Semitism in his party, but whether or not he holds some of those prejudices himself.
No response from Jeremy Corbyn on this, quoted in the article as yet, but he had earlier insisted no place for anti-Semitism in society, and his party's code of conduct was comprehensive.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And he's been saying that for a very long time, but I'm afraid those words ring hollow when you see all these cases of alleged anti-Semitism by Labour activists, by Labour councillors, by people who are very active, you know, who hold official positions in the Labour Party. And I think if you speak to the Jewish community, what a lot of people, including people who've been involved in Labour for a number of years, you know, people like Margaret Hodge, for example, what people feel is that he's very quick to condemn it when it comes to words, but in terms of the actions that he needs to take, in terms of the signals he needs to give to some of his professed supporters who do appear to be anti-Semitic on social media, he's not giving strong enough signals. And actually, I think this is incredibly, you know, he's not taking action, which means this issue is never going to go away, because there's a whole back catalogue of stuff that he said in the past that the papers will keep going back to. And I think Tom is right that this, in terms of what Jeremy Corbyn himself has said, this is one of the most serious and shocking things yet.
OK, we're going to take a break now. Coming up, we'll tell you about the man who wants to leave the EU, but who's been told he can't join the Tory party. We'll be back in just a few minutes.